Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the most important recording projects ever. Now, here's another one that you mentioned. You brought it up, and I'm so happy you did. Now, I have talked about it previously, but not quite in this enlarged format, which you'll hear about presently. It's this box. Well, I talked about the box, but not the individual releases. Handel's Italian Cantatas with instrumental accompaniment. This is a very important edition. These are 7 discs on the Glossa label. They feature La Risonanza, the orchestral ensemble, instrumental ensemble, under Fabio Bonizzoni, and some wonderful singers. Oh my goodness, these guys, and women, of course, guys generically, people, are remarkable, especially Roberta Invernizzi. Oh, can she sing? Wow. And you have Emanuela Galli and Nuria Rial and Raffaella Milanese and Maria Grazia Schiavo and all kinds of people I can't pronounce. And they're very, very good. Wonderful singers, and the performances are delicious. And that I'm going to take for granted because I have talked about the box before. But I want to talk about why it's one of the most important recording projects ever. Well, Handel was, for most of really until the mid-20th century, one of the most unknown of all of the great composers. His operas weren't performed, and that's what he mostly did. After all, most of his oratorios weren't performed. There were only a couple. There was Israel and Egypt, Messiah, Judas Maccabeus. That was sort of it for Handel. And then there were the orchestral works, which were just a tiny, tiny, tiny smidge of a percentage of what he actually wrote. What he wrote was vocal music, tons and tons of vocal music. And the music that he wrote before he got to England was largely ignored. And it was ignored because, of course, Handel was an English institution. And as long as it was up to the English to promote Handel, they were only going to promote Handel that mattered in English, like the Dettingen Te Deum and the fireworks music and Messiah and things like that. But there is a whole raft of stuff that he wrote during his sojourn in Italy when he was an apprentice composer, but apprentice composer meaning he was traveling. He was a genius from day one, practically. And the most important thing about Handel is that, he borrowed. He borrowed from everybody, and he borrowed from himself. And so much of what came later he wrote originally when he was in Italy. In its original form, we get to hear so much of the music that he was going to. Well, I give you one example. There's a wonderful aria in what's it, Terzi and Clori and some pastoral ode, which we'll get to in a minute. Arresta il passo is the Italian word for it, called Fiamma Bella. Oh, it's beautiful. Da 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 dum ya ba da 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 dum ba da 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 dum ba ba ba. That is a great tune. Well, that became an aria in the opera Agrippina on I Vento or something like that, and he reused it. He reused it all over the place later. So it's wonderful, actually, to have this music because you'd think, well, oh God, why do we need to hear it 50 times? It's not that. It's that Handel's life's work was, in a sense, a giant clump of music that he cut into various shapes and sizes depending on the circumstances. And he used things over and over again. It allows people to have an entree into this vast corpus of work and hear familiar things in addition to all the original stuff. I mean, it's mostly original stuff in most of his pieces, except for Israel and Egypt, which is nothing but borrowings. But, essentially, you want to be able to make connections. And these projects allow us to make connections, and they reveal the fact that Handel was an amazing composer before he ever got to England, and that there's just an incredible variety and range of music that he wrote in this early period, which nobody knew. He wrote more than 100 cantatas. These are just the ones with instrumental accompaniment. The Italian cantata, as codified by Alessandro Scarlatti, Domenico's dad, was basically a solo cantata. That is, you had 2 arias separated by recitatives. secco recitative, that is, just harpsichord accompaniment, to introduce the two arias. That was your basic solo cantata, very, very simple. Handel sometimes used that form, but like everything in Handel, quite often he did not. There's an unbelievable variety of forms, of structures, of instrumentation. In all of these pieces, he uses all kinds of instruments. They were written for all kinds of purposes in various circumstances. Some of them are quite short. Some of them are almost full-fledged operas. It's amazing, the range and variety of this music. And it's all here in this marvelous box on Glossa, 7 CDs. But the reason that I want to talk about it again, aside from the fact that you asked me to, because you're right, this is important in revealing the origins of much of Handel's later work, and also a whole world, a whole side to his genius that nobody knew. The other reason is that there's just much more. There's more in this series, than is in this box. These are the complete instrumental cantatas technically, but cantata is a term of art. And some of these pieces were called something else, festa teatrale or, oratunio or who knows. You could call it something else. So technically it wasn't a cantata, but it's not different from a lot of the things that are cantatas. So originally, let me just show you, these 7 CDs were all here. Here they are. And you do get works like Apollo and Daphne. Now, Apollo and Daphne is a huge, long thing. It lasts 40 minutes or something or more. And where's this other stuff? Oh, here's the one. Clori, Tirce, and Phileno. Now, Clori, Tirce, and Phileno has 2 acts or something. It's a big, long sucker here. I've got this thing. I can open it up. It's really remarkable with a large instrumental ensemble. It's for oboe and recorder and solo violin and ripieno violins and strings and instruments. And you've got 2 parts. Yeah, it's in 2 acts. It has 29 numbers. Your average Handel oratorio or opera has about 50 numbers. So we're talking about major pieces. Serious scope. Not all the cantatas are that way. Some are quite, like I said, quite short, but, in just 3 little bits that last 10 minutes. But there's every conceivable variety. It's just a magical world. There may be more of them. Nobody is really quite sure how many Handel wrote, as usual with Handel. But the interesting thing is that there are 3 other volumes in this series, which are not in the box, because technically, as I said, they're not cantatas. There are the Italian Duets and Trios, which are absolutely gorgeous. They're just miscellaneous chamber arias for multiple soloists instead of just one. And they certainly deserve to be heard equally in this series. And there are the chamber duets, the duetti da camera, which are also absolutely gorgeous. And involve, again, multiple soloists. In this case, it's Marina Di Liso and Roberta Invernizzi. Wonderful soloists. And then, of course, there is the large thingy here, the Serenata, it was called, Aci Galatea e Polifemo, which became in English Acis and Galatea. Now, the Acis and Galatea, the English version, is very popular. It was the most popular work Handel wrote in his lifetime, actually, vocal work, large vocal work, and it's been recorded 1 million times by English forces because it's in English. And the Italian version of the same story, fascinatingly, has nothing in common with the English version. Handel didn't borrow anything from this version to do that version. So you've got 2 versions of the same story, one in Italian, one in English. This one is actually better as regards plot and storyline and the way it's organized. The English one is well, it's sort of like this. There's this pastoral divagation at the beginning, and then Acis gets killed by Polifemo, who doesn't show up until Act 2. This is rather more carefully laid out, and Polifemo is a much more interestingly developed character who has some terrific arias. You can pick and choose, but for centuries, this was ignored. To the extent anyone even knew it existed. And it's just marvelous, and it's part of this series. So there's actually, not 7 CDs, there are 10 albums, because one of these is a double, 10 albums in this series, which are worth acquiring, in addition to El Boxo here. And when you put it all together, it is unquestionably one of the most important recording projects ever for what it tells us about one of the greatest composers ever, one of the most popular composers, but one whose complete achievement has been singularly hard to wrap your brain around because there's so much of it, first of all, and the exposure to it, our exposure to it was so biased, so slanted in one direction. And that other direction is really a juicy, wonderful direction because Handel was just great, absolutely great. And so I am thrilled to be able to recommend this as one of the most important recording projects ever. And I thank you for bringing it up again, because it means that you also know what the most important recording projects ever happen to be. And gosh, this is certainly one of them. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.